The first rays of dawn pierced the dense canopy of Valdis Prime, casting an eerie blue-green glow across the jungle floor. Dr. Mara Sinclair adjusted the weight of her pack, the specialized equipment digging into her shoulders as she consulted her handheld scanner. 10 days. The corporation had given her 10 days to document what no human had successfully observed before, the apex predator that ruled these untamed wilds. Day 1 audio log, 0600 hours. Mara spoke into her wrist recorder. Initial readings show heightened biometric activity approximately 2 kilometers northeast of landing site. Weather conditions stable, though atmospheric pressure suggests a storm front may develop within 48 hours. She paused, watching as a small, 6-legged creature scurried across her path, its translucent skin revealing a complex network of glowing veins beneath. Everything on Valdis Prime seemed designed to both attract and warn, bioluminescent beauty masking deadly intent. Preliminary observations confirm previous reports of extreme biodiversity. She continued. The density of predator-prey relationships here suggests a complex ecological hierarchy. Corporate intel indicates the apex species remains largely undocumented, though indigenous legends describe a creature of remarkable intelligence and ferocity. Mara didn't mention her real reason for accepting this assignment. After 3 years of safe, predictable research posts, she'd felt herself calcifying, becoming as rigid and lifeless as the specimens she cataloged. This mission was her chance to reconnect with the raw, unfiltered wonder that had drawn her to xenobiology in the first place. The jungle thickened as she pushed forward, the humid air clinging to her skin despite her climate-controlled expedition suit. Massive ferns unfurled overhead, their spiral patterns glowing with soft amber phosphorescence. Beauty and danger, intertwined in an endless dance. By midday, Mara had established her base camp in a small clearing, the portable habitat's molecular shields humming as they repelled the jungle's more curious inhabitants. A perimeter of sonic deterrence would keep larger predators at bay, at least those whose hunting patterns had been documented by previous expeditions. Base camp established, she reported to her recorder. Sentinel drone deployment in progress. First observation cycle will begin at dusk, when reported apex activity peaks. As the alien sun began its descent, casting long purple shadows through the jungle, Mara prepared her first excursion. The corporation had been clear. Observe, document, but do not engage. The data she collected would help determine whether Valdis Prime could be partially terraformed for resource extraction, or if the ecosystem was too volatile to risk large-scale human intervention. The scientific part of her understood the assignment. The human part of her, the part that still marveled at the universe's infinite variations, hoped the latter would prove true. Mara had barely ventured 500 meters from camp when her scanner's proximity alert vibrated against her wrist. Something large was moving nearby, displacing vegetation with enough force to register on her seismic sensors. She froze, her pulse quickening as she activated her camouflage hood, the fabric adjusting to match the surrounding foliage. The movement stopped. Then, a sound. Not the expected rustle of undergrowth, but a low, rumbling growl that seemed to reverberate through the very ground beneath her feet. It was followed by another sound, the distinctive high-pitched keening of smaller predators, at least 5 or 6 individuals, based on the overlapping frequencies. Mara's scientific curiosity overrode her caution. Slowly, deliberately, she edged toward the source of the commotion, each step carefully placed to minimize sound. As she parted a curtain of luminous vines, her breath caught in her throat. Before her lay a natural depression in the jungle floor, approximately 4 meters deep and twice as wide. At its center stood the largest terrestrial predator she had ever encountered, a creature of nightmare and wonder. Its muscular body was covered in iridescent scales that shifted between deep violet and midnight blue, depending on how the fading light struck them. 6 powerful limbs ended in hooked claws that could easily disembowel prey twice Mara's size, while a crown of sensory appendages framed a face dominated by 4 gleaming eyes, 2 large primary orbs flanked by smaller secondary ones, all glowing with amber bioluminescence. But what captured Mara's attention was not the creature's fearsome appearance, but its desperate situation. The predator was surrounded by a pack of smaller hunters, sleek, raptor-like beings with elongated snouts and barbed tails. They circled the pit's edge, occasionally darting forward to snap at the larger creature before retreating from its thunderous roars. The apex predator was trapped, one of its hind legs clearly injured, crimson blood matting the scales. Around it lay evidence of a brutal battle: broken tusks, shredded vegetation, and the mangled remains of what might have been the predator's original prey. Mara's training told her to retreat immediately. This was a natural predator-prey interaction, albeit an unusual inversion of the food chain. Her presence could disrupt vital ecological processes. The corporate handbook was explicit. Observer interference in predation events is strictly prohibited. Yet, as she watched the wounded titan fighting for its life, something shifted inside her. The creature wasn't just struggling, it was calculating, intelligent. Each movement, despite its injury, showed remarkable conservation of energy. It was using the terrain to its advantage, positioning itself to minimize exposure to the pack. Before she could reconsider, Mara activated her sonic deterrent at maximum frequency. The effect was immediate. The smaller predators scattered, their sensitive auditory organs overwhelmed by the piercing sound. But the unexpected consequence came when the apex predator roared in response. The combined acoustics creating a resonance that shattered Mara's communication array in a shower of sparks. She stumbled backward, the sudden silence more disorienting than the noise had been. Her wrist computer flashed a critical warning: comms offline. Emergency protocols initiated. Extraction team notified. Damn it, she muttered, knowing that without communications, she had effectively severed her lifeline to the extraction team. The emergency protocol would bring them running, but not for at least 8 days, the minimum time needed for a rescue vessel to reach her position. When she looked back toward the pit, the smaller predators had vanished into the undergrowth. The apex creature remained, its massive chest heaving with exertion, all 4 eyes now fixed directly on her. There was no mistaking it. The predator was aware of her presence and staring with unnerving intensity. Mara stood frozen, caught between scientific fascination and primal fear. The rational part of her brain cataloged details: approximately 3 meters tall at the shoulder, estimated mass of 800 kilograms, musculature suggesting both incredible speed and power. The instinctive part of her screamed to run. She did neither. Instead, she slowly reached for her specimen kit, extracting a long-range medical scanner. If she couldn't communicate with base, she could at least document this encounter. The injured leg appeared to have a deep puncture wound, likely from one of the smaller predator's barbed tails. Without treatment, infection would set in within hours in this humid environment. "I know I shouldn't do this," she whispered to herself, already removing a canister of synthetic tissue sealant from her pack. The corporation valued their field scientists enough to equip them with basic veterinary supplies, not out of compassion, but to preserve potentially valuable specimens. Mara spent the next hour fashioning a makeshift delivery system, a projectile sling that could apply the sealant from a safe distance. All the while, the predator watched her, its breathing gradually steadying, its posture shifting from defensive aggression to something closer to wary curiosity. When her contraption was ready, Mara took careful aim. "This is going to sting," she said, knowing the creature couldn't understand her words, but hoping her tone might somehow communicate her intent. But it's better than the alternative. The sealant projectile flew true, bursting against the wounded leg in a spray of bioactive foam. The predator roared, more in surprise than pain, and lunged forward, only to find the pit's steep walls still impossible to scale with its injury. Mara retreated to a safe distance, her heart pounding as she watched the creature's reaction. Initially, it snarled and snapped at the foam, but gradually ceased as the analgesic properties took effect. Within minutes, the bleeding had stopped, and the wound was protected from the jungle's countless infectious agents. Day 1. Supplemental log, she recorded, her voice unsteady with adrenaline. I've just violated at least 3 corporate protocols, including direct interference with an apex predator. The specimen is extraordinary, unlike anything in our existing database. I believe it may represent not just the top of the food chain, but a genuinely sentient hunter. She paused, watching as the creature cautiously tested its weight on the injured leg. The most remarkable aspect is its eyes. There's something there beyond mere predatory instinct, a calculation, an assessment. It's been watching me prepare the treatment, and I swear it understood what I was attempting. Night fell swiftly on Valdis Prime. The darkness absolute, save for the ghostly glow of bioluminescent flora and the distant sparkle of unfamiliar constellations. Mara returned to her camp, though not before leaving behind a portable food synthesizer programmed to produce high-protein cubes at regular intervals. It wasn't proper scientific protocol, but with her communications down, proper protocol seemed increasingly irrelevant. Sleep came fitfully that night, her dreams haunted by amber eyes watching from the darkness. Morning brought a surprise. The pit was empty. Mara approached cautiously, scanner held before her like a shield. The sonic deterrents around her camp had registered no large movement during the night, which meant the predator had gone in the opposite direction, away from her. The food synthesizer was empty, its contents apparently consumed. Day 2. 700 hours, she recorded. Subject has escaped the natural pit trap, likely due to improved mobility after treatment. Wound sealant appears to have been effective. No sign of the smaller predator pack. I will attempt to locate and continue observation from a safe distance. Tracking the creature proved easier than anticipated. Its distinctive 6-toed prints led deeper into the jungle, occasionally accompanied by spots of blood where the sealant had been insufficient to completely close the wound. Mara followed at a cautious pace, her scanner constantly sweeping for other potential threats. By midday, the trail led to a small clearing dominated by a mineral spring. The water bubbled with geothermal activity, releasing clouds of steam that carried the pungent scent of sulfur. And there, partially submerged in the hot spring, was the apex predator. Mara crouched behind a fallen log, adjusting her observation visor to maximum magnification. The creature was methodically cleaning its wound, the hot mineral water likely providing some relief from pain and helping prevent infection. It was, she realized, engaging in deliberate healthcare, behavior typically associated with far more advanced species. She was so engrossed in her observation that she failed to notice the change in wind direction until it was too late. The breeze shifted, carrying her scent directly toward the spring. The predator's head snapped up, all 4 eyes locking onto her position with unerring precision. Mara froze, her breath caught in her throat. Running would trigger a chase response. Sudden movements might be interpreted as aggression. She remained absolutely still, her mind racing through her limited options. The predator rose from the spring, water cascading from its massive form as it stepped onto the shore. Its injured leg still bore the distinctive blue tint of the synthetic sealant, but it moved with only a slight limp now, a remarkable recovery rate that further confirmed the creature's extraordinary physiology. For a long, terrifying moment, they simply stared at each other across the clearing. Then, to Mara's astonishment, the predator lowered its head slightly, not in submission, but in what almost appeared to be acknowledgement, before turning and disappearing into the dense undergrowth. Day 2. Supplemental log, Mara whispered, her voice trembling with excitement rather than fear. The subject recognized me. I'm certain of it. It made a conscious decision not to attack, despite having every advantage. This suggests not only intelligence but potentially a rudimentary moral framework, or at least a concept of reciprocity. She spent the remainder of the day conducting a thorough survey of the area, documenting the various plant species and smaller creatures that shared the predator's territory. The storm her instruments had predicted was gathering strength, dark clouds visible through breaks in the canopy. She would need to secure her camp before nightfall. As twilight approached, Mara made her way back to base, her mind still processing the encounter at the spring. The corporate analysts would be skeptical of her observations. Intelligence and moral reasoning were attributes they preferred to reserve for humans and a select few client species. Anything that complicated the resource extraction narrative was typically dismissed as anthropomorphization. She was within sight of her camp when her scanner's proximity alert vibrated frantically against her wrist. Something large was approaching, fast. Mara broke into a run, her boots slipping on the damp undergrowth as she raced for the safety of her molecular shields. She was still 10 meters from the perimeter when a shadow detached itself from the jungle to her right. Not the apex predator she had treated, but another of the raptor-like hunters that had surrounded it. The creature was sleeker than she had initially observed, its movements lightning quick as it cut off her path to safety. Mara skidded to a halt, slowly backing away as she reached for the sonic deterrent at her belt. The predator advanced, its barbed tail raised like a scorpion stinger, venom dripping from the needle-sharp tip. One scratch would be enough to paralyze her. Her fingers closed around the deterrent just as the creature tensed to spring. She braced herself, knowing the device might not activate quickly enough to prevent the initial attack. The attack never came. Instead, a thunderous roar split the air, and a massive form crashed through the undergrowth behind her. The raptor predator froze, its attention shifting to the new threat. Mara didn't need to turn to know what had arrived. The apex predator she had treated moved past her, positioning itself between her and the smaller hunter. Its scales bristled, sensory crown fully extended in a display of dominance. The message was unmistakable. This human is under my protection. The standoff lasted only seconds before the raptor predator retreated, clearly unwilling to challenge the apex hunter despite its recent injury. Mara remained absolutely still until the smaller creature had vanished into the jungle. Only then did she dare to look directly at her unexpected guardian. The massive predator turned to face her, its amber eyes studying her with that same unsettling intelligence she had noticed before. It made no move to approach, maintaining a respectful distance that suggested it understood the concept of personal space, another indicator of advanced cognition. "Thank you," Mara said softly, the words emerging before she could consider how absurd it was to address an alien predator as though it could understand her. Perhaps more absurd was what happened next. The creature dipped its head in that same acknowledgement she had witnessed at the spring, then deliberately turned and walked toward the edge of her camp's perimeter. There, it settled onto its haunches, positioning itself with a clear view of the surrounding jungle. It took Mara several minutes to comprehend what she was seeing. The apex predator had appointed itself her sentinel. Day 2. Evening log. She recorded once, safely, inside her habitat, the molecular shields humming reassuringly between her and the outside world. I have witnessed behavior that defies conventional xenobiological classification. The apex predator has not only recognized me as the source of its medical treatment, but has actively intervened to protect me from another predator. She paused, knowing how her next statement would be received by corporate analysts. I believe what I'm observing is the foundation of cross-species trust, possibly even the beginning of domestication, though that term seems inadequate given the creature's obvious intelligence. This changes everything we thought we knew about Valdez Prime's ecological structure. Through the transparent wall of her habitat, she could see the predator, still at its self-appointed post, its massive form silhouetted against the darkening sky. The approaching storm had brought night early, with distant lightning illuminating the roiling clouds. Mara slept soundly that night, despite the raging tempest outside. For the first time since landing on Valdez Prime, she felt something approaching safety. The pattern established itself over the next 3 days. Each morning, Mara would emerge from her habitat to find the predator gone, presumably hunting or patrolling its territory. By evening, it would return, taking up its position at the camp's perimeter. Twice more, it intercepted smaller hunters that ventured too close to her base, each time driving them away without apparent effort. On the third evening, Mara decided to push the boundaries of their unusual relationship. She programmed the food synthesizer to produce a protein cube with higher nutrient density than standard rations, designed to appeal to carnivorous species. Then, carefully, she placed it on the ground at the edge of the molecular shield perimeter and deactivated a small section of the barrier. Day 5, 1900 hours, she recorded, attempting deliberate food sharing to establish positive association and reinforce trust building. From the safety of her habitat, she watched as the predator approached the offering. It sniffed cautiously at first, then consumed the cube in a single bite. Afterward, it looked directly at her through the transparent wall and made a low, rumbling sound. Not a growl, but something closer to a purr. Response positive, Mara continued, unable to keep the excitement from her voice. Subject displays clear understanding of gift-giving as social bonding. This suggests not only intelligence but a sophisticated emotional framework. The routine of mutual observation and evening feeding continued, with each interaction revealing new facets of the creature's intelligence. By the 6th day, Mara had begun to think of it as Guardian, a name she kept to herself, knowing how the corporation would react to such overt anthropomorphization. It was on the morning of the 7th day that everything changed. Mara awoke to the sound of her habitat's structural integrity alarm. The storm, which had been building in intensity for days, had finally unleashed its full fury. Torrential rain hammered against the molecular shields, while wind-driven debris tested the limits of the barrier's design parameters. Day 7 emergency log, she shouted over the howling wind. Habitat experiencing critical stress from Category 5 storm system. Molecular shields at 60% capacity and falling. Requesting immediate... She stopped, remembering that her communications array was still non-functional. No one could hear her distress call. A thunderous crack split the air as a massive tree branch, torn loose by the gale, slammed into her habitat's eastern shield. The impact created a cascading failure in the molecular matrix. And suddenly, rain was pouring through a meter-wide gap in her only protection. Mara scrambled to activate the emergency repair protocols, but the system was overwhelmed by the multiple breach points now appearing throughout the shield network. Water pooled on the habitat floor, shorting out essential systems in crackling bursts of electricity. Habitat compromised, she recorded, gathering her survival essentials into a waterproof pack. Forced to abandon base camp, will attempt to locate natural shelter until storm abates. Outside, the jungle had transformed into a maelstrom of thrashing vegetation and blinding rain. Visibility was reduced to mere meters, and the howling wind drowned out all other sounds. Mara struggled forward, her expedition suit providing minimal protection against the elements. She had no idea where Guardian might be. Likely, the intelligent predator had sought proper shelter long before the storm reached its peak. She had managed perhaps 200 meters from her ruined camp when her scanner picked up movement ahead. Multiple signatures, moving with purpose despite the storm. Not Guardian, but something else. Something hunting. Mara ducked behind a fallen tree, just as a pack of the raptor-like predators emerged from the curtain of rain. 6 of them, moving in coordinated formation, their barbed tails held high despite the punishing wind. They paused, heads swiveling as they tested the air, and Mara realized with horror that they were tracking her scent. The storm had created perfect hunting conditions for them, the rain dampening the effectiveness of her sonic deterrents, the wind masking their approach, and the destruction of her habitat forcing her into their domain. They had adapted to the opportunity with frightening intelligence. The lead hunter turned in her direction, its elongated snout opening to reveal rows of needle-like teeth. Mara pressed herself against the log, knowing her position was hopelessly exposed. If she ran, they would chase her down in seconds. If she remained, they would flank and surround her. The first hunter tensed to spring, and then the world exploded into chaos. A roar of primal fury shattered the storm's cacophony as Guardian materialized from the driving rain, its massive form launching into the center of the pack with devastating impact. 2 of the smaller predators were sent flying by the initial charge, while a third found itself impaled on Guardian's hooked claws. The remaining hunters scattered, only to regroup and attack from multiple angles. Guardian roared again, its sensory crown fully extended as it tracked each assailant through the downpour. One hunter leapt for its injured hind leg, only to be caught mid-air and crushed between powerful jaws. Mara watched in stunned amazement as Guardian systematically dismantled the hunting pack, each movement a calculated response to their coordinated attacks. This wasn't mindless aggression. It was tactical combat, executed with frightening precision. Within minutes, 3 of the hunters lay dead, while the remaining 3 retreated into the storm, their pack strategy broken by Guardian's overwhelming counterattack. Guardian stood amid the carnage, chest heaving, scales glistening with rain and blood, some of it its own. Fresh wounds marked its flanks, where the hunter's barbed tails had found their mark. Yet, despite its injuries, it turned immediately to Mara, approaching her position with deliberate steps. Mara stood on shaking legs, rain plastering her hair to her face as she confronted the reality of what had just occurred. Guardian had not simply happened upon the confrontation. It had tracked her through the storm, arrived precisely when she was in mortal danger, and fought with remarkable determination to protect her. "You came looking for me," she whispered, the words lost in the storm but the meaning clear in her expression. Guardian lowered its massive head until it was level with hers, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from its body. Its amber eyes studied her with unmistakable concern, 4 glowing orbs that seemed to pierce through her scientific detachment to the frightened human beneath. Then, with gentle insistence, it nudged her shoulder, urging her away from her hiding place and back toward the direction from which it had come. Mara understood immediately. Guardian was leading her to shelter. She followed without hesitation, keeping close to the massive predator's flank as it navigated the storm-ravaged jungle with confident strides. The journey was arduous, with fallen trees and flooded ground slowing their progress. But Guardian remained patient, occasionally pausing to ensure she kept pace. After what felt like hours, but was likely only 20 minutes, they arrived at the entrance to a cave system set into a rocky hillside. The opening was partially concealed by hanging vines, but large enough to admit Guardian's bulk. Inside, the cave extended back into darkness, but the immediate chamber was dry and surprisingly warm. Day 7. Supplemental log. Mara recorded once she had caught her breath. I have been led to shelter by the apex predator, following a direct intervention that saved my life. The level of protective behavior displayed is unprecedented in xenobiological records. She paused, watching as Guardian settled at the cave entrance, positioning itself once again as a sentinel between her and the dangers outside. I believe what I'm witnessing goes beyond learned association or conditioned response. This creature has formed a genuine bond, perhaps even an emotional attachment. It recognizes me as an individual deserving of protection, not merely as a source of food or medical treatment. The storm raged through the night, but inside the cave, Mara found unexpected comfort. Guardian's massive body radiated heat that kept the chamber temperate, despite the plummeting external temperature. The rhythmic sound of its breathing created a soothing counterpoint to the storm's fury. For the first time since her childhood, Mara found herself talking aloud to a non-human companion, describing her research, her homeworld, and her reasons for coming to Valdis Prime. Guardian listened with what she could only interpret as attentive interest, its sensory crown adjusting to track her movements as she paced the cave. "The corporation won't believe this," she told it, smiling ruefully. "They'll say I've gone native, that I'm projecting human characteristics onto an animal. But you're not just an animal, are you? You understand far more than they'd ever admit." Guardian rumbled in response, a sound she had come to recognize as acknowledgement rather than aggression. Morning brought clear skies and the sobering task of assessing her situation. Her habitat was destroyed, her communications array non-functional, and her supplies limited to what she had managed to grab during her hasty evacuation. The extraction team wouldn't arrive for at least 3 more days, assuming the emergency protocol had successfully transmitted before her systems failed. Day 8, 800 hours, she recorded as she surveyed the jungle from the cave entrance. Storm has passed, but damage to the ecosystem is extensive. Flooding in lower elevations may have displaced predator populations, potentially increasing encounter risk. Guardian had left at dawn, presumably to hunt, but returned mid-morning with a large herbivore carcass, which it deposited near the cave entrance before withdrawing to a respectful distance. The implication was clear. This was for her. Mara considered the offering. Her emergency rations would last another day at most, and her portable synthesizer had been damaged in the evacuation. The herbivore appeared similar to Earth ungulates, likely with digestible protein structures compatible with human metabolism. Day 8, supplemental log, she recorded, already gathering materials for a small cooking fire. Subject has graduated from accepting food offerings to actively providing sustenance. This represents a significant evolutionary step in interspecies cooperation. She paused, watching as Guardian settled into its now familiar sentinel position. I find myself wondering if this behavior is entirely unprecedented, or if previous expeditions encountered similar phenomena but failed to document them due to corporate pressure. The resource extraction narrative requires these creatures to be classified as dangerous predators, not potential companions or partners. The day passed in relative tranquility as Mara explored the immediate vicinity of the cave, always under Guardian's watchful protection. She discovered a freshwater spring nearby, allowing her to replenish her drinking supply and attempt basic repairs on some of her damaged equipment. By evening, she had cobbled together a rudimentary transmitter from salvaged components, but its range was severely limited, barely enough to reach orbit, let alone the nearest corporate outpost. Still, it might help the extraction team pinpoint her location once they arrived in system. Day 8, evening log, she recorded as twilight descended. Tomorrow I will attempt to reach my original landing site. The emergency beacon there should still be operational and might provide components to boost my transmitter's range. The journey to the landing site would be risky, involving a trek through areas of the jungle she hadn't yet explored. But with Guardian by her side, Mara felt a confidence that bordered on invincibility. The massive predator had proven itself not just a protector, but a guide. Its knowledge of the terrain far superior to her technological mapping. As night fell, Mara found herself sitting beside Guardian at the cave entrance, watching the unfamiliar stars emerge above the canopy. On impulse, she reached out and placed her hand on the creature's foreleg, feeling the smooth scales beneath her palm. Guardian tensed momentarily, then relaxed, accepting the touch as it had accepted her presence in its territory. Something profound had transpired between them, a bridge across species, ecology, and evolution that defied scientific categorization. "I don't know what will happen when the extraction team arrives," she said softly. "They won't understand this. They'll see you as a threat, not a friend." Guardian rumbled, its amber eyes fixed on the stars above, as though it too contemplated the future. Morning brought a new determination. Mara gathered her essential equipment, prepared her makeshift transmitter, and set out for the landing site with Guardian padding silently beside her. The jungle had begun to recover from the storm's devastation, with fallen trees already serving as nurse logs for saplings, and new growth emerging from mud-covered ground. Day 9, 1,000 hours, she recorded, as they navigated a particularly dense section of undergrowth. Ecosystem, showing remarkable resilience post-storm. Preliminary observations suggest accelerated growth patterns, triggered by extreme weather events. Possible adaptation to Valdis Prime's volatile climate. She was so engrossed in her observations that she almost missed Guardian's sudden change in demeanor. The massive predator froze, its sensory crown fully extended, all 4 eyes focused on something Mara couldn't perceive. Then she heard it, the distinctive hum of an approaching shuttle. The extraction team had arrived a day early. Mara's heart sank. She wasn't ready. She hadn't prepared Guardian for the arrival of other humans, hadn't figured out how to explain the extraordinary bond they had formed. The corporate protocol was clear. Apex predators were to be tranquilized and removed from extraction zones immediately. "Guardian," she said urgently, turning to the creature beside her. "You need to hide. The people coming, they won't understand. They'll see you as a threat." Guardian rumbled, its posture shifting subtly from relaxed companionship to alert vigilance. It understood something was wrong, even if it couldn't comprehend the specific danger. The shuttle's engines grew louder, and through a break in the canopy, Mara spotted its sleek form descending toward her original landing site. She had perhaps 10 minutes before the extraction team would deploy and begin their search pattern. "Please," she whispered, placing her hand on Guardian's foreleg. "Trust me one more time. Stay hidden until I call for you." To her amazement and relief, Guardian dipped its head in that now familiar gesture of acknowledgement, then melted into the undergrowth with a silence belied by its massive size. Within seconds, it had vanished completely from view, though Mara sensed it remained nearby, watching and waiting. She continued toward the landing site alone, her mind racing through scenarios. The extraction team would expect a traumatized scientist in desperate need of rescue, not a woman reluctant to leave, arguing for the protection of an apex predator. Her credibility would be instantly questioned if she revealed the full extent of her experiences. The landing site came into view, the shuttle's gleaming hull reflecting the mid-morning sunlight. 4 figures in corporate security uniforms had already deployed, their stance and equipment indicating they expected hostiles rather than a simple extraction. "Hello," Mara called, stepping into the clearing with her hands raised. "Corporate ID Sierra 927, Dr. Mara Sinclair. I'm unharmed." The security team swiveled toward her, weapons lowering, but not holstering. The lead officer, a weathered woman with lieutenant insignia, approached cautiously. "Dr. Sinclair," she acknowledged. "We received your emergency beacon 8 days ago. Comms have been down since... Situation report?" Mara took a deep breath. This was the moment that would define everything that followed. "My habitat was destroyed in a Category 5 storm," she reported, sticking to verifiable facts. "I've been conducting field research from alternate shelters since then. My primary objectives have been achieved beyond initial projections." The lieutenant's expression remained professionally neutral, but Mara detected a hint of surprise. Field scientists in her situation were typically found in considerably worse condition, physically and mentally. "We detected multiple apex predator signatures in this region," the lieutenant said, gesturing to her scanner. You've been fortunate to avoid encounters. Mara chose her words carefully. I've observed the indigenous apex species. Yes. Their behavior is remarkable. Far more complex than corporate briefings suggested. Hostile? Quite the opposite. I believe they possess intelligence comparable to dolphin or higher primate levels, with sophisticated social structures and the capacity for interspecies cooperation. The lieutenant frowned, clearly uncomfortable with this assessment. Doctor, you've been in isolation for 9 days under extreme conditions. Medical protocol suggests... I'm not suffering from isolation psychosis, Mara interrupted, her scientific authority asserting itself. My observations are methodical and documented. The apex predators of Valdis Prime represent not just an ecological keystone, but a potentially sentient species deserving of protected status. The words hung in the air between them, their implications rippling outward like stones dropped in still water. Corporate resource extraction plans would be significantly complicated if apex predators were reclassified as sentient beings. That determination isn't yours to make, Doctor, the lieutenant said finally. Our orders are to extract you and your research data. Classification decisions will be made by the Xenobiology Board. Mara nodded, knowing this was the best she could hope for at this stage. My data is intact. I'll prepare it for transfer while your team secures the shuttle. The lieutenant hesitated, then nodded sharply before turning to organize her team. Mara used the momentary privacy to activate her wrist recorder. Day 9. Final field log, she said softly. Extraction team has arrived. I will attempt to secure protected status for the apex species, based on documented intelligence and cooperative behaviors. If unsuccessful through official channels, alternative publication methods may be necessary. She glanced toward the jungle's edge, where she knew Guardian was watching. What would happen to the magnificent creature once she left? Would it understand her absence, or perceive it as abandonment? The thought left an unexpected ache in her chest. As the security team prepared the shuttle for departure, Mara methodically organized her research data, ensuring that every interaction with Guardian was meticulously documented. The evidence was compelling. Multiple instances of reciprocity, protection, food sharing, and what could only be described as empathetic behavior. If the Xenobiology Board maintained any scientific integrity, they would have to acknowledge the implications. She was so focused on her task that she almost missed the lieutenant's sudden curse, followed by the raising of weapons. Mara looked up to see all 4 security officers in defensive positions, their attention fixed on the jungle's edge. Guardian had emerged from the undergrowth, its massive form immediately commanding attention. It made no aggressive moves, simply standing at the clearing's perimeter, all 4 eyes focused on Mara. "Hold fire!" Mara shouted, moving swiftly to position herself between the security team and Guardian. "It's not attacking. It's observing." "Doctor, step away from the predator," the lieutenant ordered, her weapon trained on Guardian's chest. "That's an Alpha-class threat." "It's not a threat," Mara insisted, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "This is the subject of my research, the apex predator that protected me after the storm. If it meant harm, none of us would be standing here talking about it." The lieutenant's expression wavered between professional protocol and the undeniable reality before her. Guardian remained perfectly still, making no threatening gestures despite the weapons pointed in its direction. "It's remained in my proximity for 7 days," Mara continued, seizing the moment of uncertainty. "It's driven off other predators, provided food, and led me to shelter during the storm. These are not the actions of a mindless hunter." Slowly, deliberately, Mara turned her back on the security team and walked toward Guardian. She heard the lieutenant's sharp intake of breath, but continued forward until she stood directly before the massive predator. "This is what I've been documenting," she said, reaching up to place her hand on Guardian's foreleg in the gesture that had become their shared language. Interspecies cooperation beyond anything in our existing xenobiological framework. Guardian rumbled softly, lowering its head to Mara's level in a display that couldn't be misinterpreted as anything but gentle recognition. The security team watched in stunned silence as one of Valdis Prime's most feared predators behaved like an oversized house pet. "My God," the lieutenant whispered, her weapon finally lowering. "That's impossible." "Not impossible," Mara corrected. "Just unprecedented and worthy of protection." The standoff gradually dissolved as Guardian made no aggressive moves, and the security team's threat assessment protocols found themselves inadequate to the situation. The lieutenant eventually ordered her team to stand down, though they maintained a wary distance from the massive predator. "I'm including this interaction in my official report," the lieutenant said as they prepared for final departure. "I can't guarantee how headquarters will respond, but they can't dismiss direct observation." Mara nodded, grateful for even this small concession. "Thank you." The most difficult moment came when she had to explain to Guardian that she was leaving. The creature seemed to understand her departure was imminent, its behavior becoming increasingly attentive as the shuttle's pre-flight checks completed. "I'll come back," she promised, standing before Guardian one last time. "I don't know how long it will take, but I'll make them understand what I've discovered here." Guardian rumbled, its sensory crown fully extended as though imprinting her scent, appearance, and voice for future recognition. Then, in a gesture that left even the skeptical security team murmuring in astonishment, it deliberately pressed its forehead against hers, a moment of connection that transcended species boundaries. As the shuttle lifted off, Mara watched through the viewport as Guardian's form grew smaller below, the magnificent predator maintaining its position at the clearing's edge until they passed beyond the canopy and into the open sky. "Final expedition log," she recorded, as Valdis Prime receded beneath them. "What began as standard ecological survey has resulted in discovery with profound implications for our understanding of interspecies relationships. The apex predator of Valdis Prime is not merely a sophisticated hunter, but a being capable of recognizing and reciprocating compassion." She paused, watching the planet's curve appear below them, its vibrant greens and blues a stark contrast to the darkness of space beyond. The conventional narrative of resource extraction must be reconsidered in light of these findings. Valdis Prime is not simply an untapped reservoir of materials, but home to potentially sentient beings whose intelligence and social structures we have only begun to comprehend. The lieutenant, overhearing this final entry, gave Mara a measured look. "The corporation won't like those conclusions. Doctor, resource rights for Valdis Prime represent a significant investment." "I'm aware," Mara replied calmly. "But scientific integrity demands I report what I've observed, not what's convenient for the quarterly projections. And if they suppress your findings, reclassify your observations as stress-induced anthropomorphization?" Mara smiled, holding up her wrist recorder. "I've already transmitted my full logs to 3 independent xenobiological journals. Academic curiosity will override corporate interests, given sufficient evidence." The lieutenant's expression shifted from concern to reluctant respect. "You planned this from the beginning." "Not exactly," Mara admitted, her thoughts returning to that first encounter, the trapped predator, surrounded and snarling, that had transformed into her most unlikely guardian. "I expected to document an ecological hierarchy. Instead, I found a kindred spirit." As the shuttle accelerated toward the waiting corporate vessel in orbit, Mara made a silent promise to the magnificent creature she'd left behind. She would return to Valdis Prime, not as a corporate scientist, but as an advocate for a world whose wonders had only begun to reveal themselves. And somewhere in the bioluminescent jungles below, a predator with amber eyes, waited, guarding the memory of an unexpected friendship that had changed two species forever.